So we've got a major new development in one of the fights to strike down state bans on short-barreled rifles. FPC just moved for summary judgment in a lawsuit against New Jersey's ban on SBRs, arguing that that ban is unconstitutional, but instead of jumping straight into defending the ban, New Jersey decided to instead try to slow this case down. The state has responded with a procedural objection, and they're claiming that the motion is premature and that the court here should essentially delay this case, but then also ultimately just dismiss this challenge. So let's talk about what is currently unfolding in this critical SBR challenge. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. You can also click the like button. That just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content and it shares it to more people. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always trying to expand upon their benefits and give you as much as possible as a member. They've added a ton of new things like civil liability coverage, red flag coverage, 4 guaranteed attorneys for your self-defense case, and a lot more. So if you're interested, check them out using the link down below. And if you use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $25 off of your sign-up fee. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you will know that in this case, there is a challenge against the state of New Jersey's ban on short-barreled rifles. This lawsuit was filed after Congress reduced the federal NFA tax to $0 under the One Big Beautiful bill. After that was passed, a lot of lawsuits were launched against the NFA. And since that happened, we've seen a wave of coordinated legal challenges aimed at dismantling the remaining restrictions on suppressors, SBRs, and other NFA items. Now, FPC's core argument in this lawsuit against the New Jersey ban is very straightforward. They argue that short-barreled rifles are arms protected by the Second Amendment, that they're in common use for lawful purposes, that they are rarely actually used in crimes, and that there is no historical tradition of banning these items. So New Jersey's total prohibition, they argue, violates the Constitution under Bruin and violates the Second Amendment. Now, here is where things are currently escalating. After FPC filed their motion for summary judgment, essentially telling the court that this case can be decided as a matter of law, New Jersey essentially did not respond with historical evidence defending this ban under Bruin. Instead, the state is arguing that this motion is premature, that discovery has not occurred yet, and that the court here should delay this case, delay deciding the constitutional question, and then after that delay, potentially also just simply dismiss this case. Now, that procedural maneuver is the newest development in this case, and it's a critical one to understand where this case is now moving forward, because right now there's a coordinated effort in this lawsuit to simply delay the effort. New Jersey also recently filed the answer to the complaint in this lawsuit, and they state in that they're just simply asking for the court here to dismiss the lawsuit entirely right here and now. So first, New Jersey, in that answer and their request for a dismissal, they claim that the plaintiffs don't even have the right to bring this case. They argue that the plaintiffs lack standing and that this case is not yet ripe for review. In other words, New Jersey says that no one has been harmed enough yet, so the court here should not simply hear this case and just simply throw it out. Second, New Jersey claims absolute and qualified immunity. They argue that the state officials here cannot be sued for enforcing these laws. Now, their third argument in this answer and the request for a dismissal is really the heart of their whole argument in this entire case. New Jersey argues that the SBR ban does not violate the Second Amendment because it is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulations. They rely on some old precedent claiming that short-barreled rifles fall outside the scope and core protections of the Second Amendment. So in other words, they argue that even if SBRs are arms, they can still be banned because the governments have historically regulated what they claim are dangerous weapons. But here is the problem currently with New Jersey. Under Bruin, the burden is on the government to prove a historical analog, and there is no founding era tradition of banning short-barreled rifles. There is no SBR ban dating back to 1791. There's no SBR ban even dating back to 1868, and the NFA did not exist until 1934. And so that is a huge constitutional gap that New Jersey now has to overcome. So instead of trying to overcome that, they're just simply trying to delay this case. New Jersey tries to rely on older court precedent claiming that these weapons are not part of the core of the Second Amendment. And this is the type of reasoning that Bruin actually rejected. Bruin says that if an arm is in common use for lawful purposes, it is protected unless the government proves historical justification. and FPC has already shown that SBRs are widely owned and rarely used in crimes. Now, here's something important that just happened behind the scenes, which I mentioned earlier. After FPC filed their motion for summary judgment to end this case right here now, sooner rather than later, New Jersey responded to that in a very tricky way. They're trying to get around that. The state has now asked for the court for a pre-motion conference and argued that FPC's motion is premature. They claim discovery hasn't taken place yet, and they say that they need additional time before the court can decide this case. They are also arguing that FPC's motion may not comply with certain local procedural requirements, and they're asking for the court to either delay briefing or dismiss the motion on technical grounds. In short, instead of jumping straight into defending this ban under Bruin's historical test or trying to defend it under the Second Amendment, the state of New Jersey is trying to slow the timeline and delay this case and get this motion thrown out, maybe based on some procedural grounds. That matters because the court will now have to decide whether to let this case move forward quickly or allow New Jersey to stretch out the process for as long as possible. So what does this really mean for this case going forward? New Jersey is throwing kind of every defense at this case that they can. They argue that there is no standing, that this case is not ripe, that they have immunity, that the Commerce Clause protects what they do, that they have a historical tradition of banning dangerous weapons like SBRs is what they claim. They're pointing to old case law. And now they're also throwing in some procedural delay and some procedural arguments to not only delay this case, potentially try to get the motion thrown out so that they don't even have to address the questions that are brought up in that very motion. At its core, the state is defending a total ban on a class of firearms. That is exactly what the Supreme Court has warned states not to do. This case now becomes part of a much larger coordinated legal effort against the NFA. There are lawsuits currently in Texas district courts challenging the NFA, suppressor restrictions, SBR restrictions, and all of those based on the $0 tax. There's a different suppressor ban, the Peterson case, that is likely heading to the Supreme Court. And now also you have some state challenges against SBRs. This is a multi-front attack against the remaining NFA restrictions. Now, the court here in this New Jersey case did grant a delay on the motions, and they will hold a conference with the parties, and they will try to determine if the state's request for a delay should actually be granted or not, and if this case should be allowed to move forward despite what New Jersey is arguing. But regardless if this happens with a delay, the court here will eventually have to decide this issue. They will have to look at, does New Jersey's SBR ban survive under Bruin? Is there historical support for banning SBRs, or does the law collapse like some other ones after Bruin? And if FPC wins here, it opens the door of striking down other state bans on items like SBR, suppressors, and other things as well, which are regulated under the NFA. So that's where things currently stand right now in this critical state SBR ban, the FPC versus Platkin case. New Jersey is fighting to stall the case, but it's not looking good for them, and that's really why they're trying to cause this delay. So as it develops more, as we get more information, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of 2A content, and so it shares it to more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.